Over the past 24 months, there's been a great deal of uncertainty in the marketplace for exotic cars, supercars, hypercars, collector cars. And that was generally due to two major factors. The first being macroeconomic trends like a decline in the housing market, political uncertainty, and things like that, alongside the obvious run-up in value that we saw from 2020 to 2022 with inventory shortages and overproduction of new cars, all of which seemed to sell, and a skyrocketing of values of collector cars through online auctions and things like that. And what I've suspected would happen, and generally seen over the course of the last 12 months or so, has been sort of a demarcation in the successes and failures of the marketplace. The failures are more so in the high production, non-numbered, less rare, less significant, just driver kind of normal supercars that someone might own. Your higher production Ferraris, McLarens, Lamborghinis, and things like that, we have certainly seen soften, and that's where you do have like the long-term ownership cost liabilities that come in. On the other side of the market, the truly rare, truly significant, top-tier collector grade stuff has continued a generally upward trajectory. But that trajectory changed a lot over the last 30 days, and that's what I wanted to talk about in today's video. That's also what makes our sponsor of this month's videos on VINwiki so pertinent. That is Premier Financial Services. Now, you can finance a car through a lot of different banks, but you cannot find the expertise that the customer service and the sales team at Premier have to support you through your purchase of an exotic car. And their Simple Lease is the most powerful tool in the world of exotic car financing, but it's even more powerful because of that team behind it, because they can advise you as to what the value trajectory of the car that you're looking at is likely to be. That if it is a higher production, more vulnerable value, they're able to say, look, this is where the residual needs to be. This is what your ownership cost is probably going to look like, versus if it is something that is a collector grade car that they have a lot of confidence in because of their decades of experience in the industry, they can say this is where you can feel a little bit more confident in your resale value, in where your money is going. And as people have less certainty in the stock market and other asset classes, they are treating cars more and more so like an investment. And that's not what I'm advising here. I do view them personally as an asset class, but it really is important to understand that it is ultra rare that over any 10-year horizon, any of these cars beat the stock market. Now, that being said, if it is an expertise that you're able to develop through the research that you can do on things like YouTube these days, you can make more strategic buying decisions, and it has, for me, resulted in a massive swing in my net worth that I never imagined was even possible when I started to identify some of these cars as being more rare. But talking to people like the guys at Premier, like John Tamarian at Curated, like Matthew Ivanhoe at The Cultivated Collector, all of these experts are able to advise their clients to make the most responsible decisions, to identify the right cars, and that's really what today's video is about, because honestly, if I were guessing 12, 24 months ago, I would have gotten a lot of these wrong, and I never would have imagined the trajectory, much less the magnitude of that upward swing in value that we are seeing. I mean, just this week, we watched a Ferrari Challenge Stradale do $603,000 on Bring a Trailer. Now, it was an extraordinary example, but it was silver. Now, that is rare on a Stradale. So many of them are Rosso Corsa, Rosso Scuderia, black, things like that. So silver is rare. It was an exceptionally well-kept example, 4,500 miles, but 603 grand is about twice what the market was generally thought to be. Similarly, about a month ago, we saw a 16M do $825,000 on Bring a Trailer. Once again, maybe twice what the car would have been thought to be worth, and that was a really good condition, standard Rosso Corsa car. Last year, we did see a perfectly spec'd yellow 16M do over $600,000, and that was seen to be like pie in the sky, best possible money, but not $825,000. I mean, that is a staggering figure to behold. We had also seen a Special do $752,000 on Bring a Trailer a fairly short time ago, which was again a very strong market indicator, but a very, very great car that Ferrari has made. And one of the reasons why I might not have picked the Ferrari market to explode in the way it seems to be doing is that we're in a difficult time for Ferrari as a brand and in the relationships that they keep with their customers, because over the past decade in particular, we have seen a huge run-up in Ferrari values, especially the values of the supercars, the hypercars, the 288, F40, F50, Enzo, LaFerrari, gearing up to what would be the F80 allocations and the Icona SP allocations. And so, generally, we didn't see that go all that that well, where there wasn't quite the reception to the F80, both due to its $4 million price and the V6 hybrid aspect of the car. But they did all sell, they have all been allocated. And so right now we are not in a window where people would generally be buying used Ferraris to add to their Ferrari app and build status with the manufacturer. These are people buying the actual cars that they want to own, drive, and collect. And that's a much more pure sense of what people are spending their money on. And that's why we're seeing the cars go up that are going up. You know, you would think there that there might be a softening of the values of the hypercars because people aren't buying them to hold for a decade necessarily, but that hasn't been the case at all. Going into the auction season at Monterey Car Week last month, there were a couple of cars that people were really curious to see what they would bring. The first was the yellow F50 that had been formerly owned by Ralph Lauren that had like a $7 to $8 million estimate and ended up bringing $9.2 million. Now that was a great result, a record for an F50, but not so much of a result that it seems like it's going to change like the market for all 90s cars the way that it would if it had done 12, 13, 14 million. Similarly, the F40 LM that RM sold did just over 11 million, an extraordinary result, but not wildly outside the general imagination of the community that follows and tracks these cars. And so a great number, but once again, not a market-changing number for cars beyond F40 LMs, which it set a record for. Now, there was a rumor pertaining to the F50 GT that was on display and would go on to win at Quail that the owner had refused an offer of $100 million. Now, that is a crazy number, but if the market for a great F50 is 8 to 10 million, then to say that one of 3 F50 GTs is worth 9 figures, I suppose could be real. Regardless, that would make it the second most valuable car ever to transact, and a really special thing that, you know, in the world of cars that are really upward in this trajectory of value, 90s and 2000 cars in particular, maybe that makes sense, but still a crazy thing to imagine that ultimately didn't transact, but still does sort of become part of the community of knowledge that does impact the way these cars are valued and perceived. Now, we did see the insane $26 million transaction of the SP3 Daytona, an extraordinary car, but because of the charity element being offered for the Ferrari Foundation, no fees for RM, things like that, it's not necessarily a market indicator. It doesn't mean that all these cars that were just worth $5, $6, $7 million are now worth 10, 15, 20. It's just a great result for a good cause, and certainly in line with some of the other extraordinary transactions, but not necessarily on a percentage basis. Now, the true stars of the RM auction at Car Week were really the less special Ferraris that you would have expected strong numbers out of, but nothing like what they did. Seeing a 599 GTO in Rosso Corsa do $2 million out of the Ming collection, even as a no-mile, cool spec car with great history, was nuts. I mean, these cars had barely been million-dollar cars for the last couple of years, and so to double that, even for a great example, was a surprise. Similarly, an $825,000 transaction for our Ferrari 575 Super America, the removable roof or the fold-back roof of the 575 with an F1 transmission, really just a crazy number for that car. Once again, probably twice what we really thought the car should have brought or would have brought, but apparently the market is that hot on them. We saw a gray 550 Maranello and a very uniquely color of blue F1 599 both do $368,000. Crazy numbers for cars that are definitely lovely to own, wonderful cars, but not nearly as collectible as generally with other things that we're seeing sell. And so great money, great examples, and it's hard to know how indicative they are of the future market. But you know, the fact is that with this many transactions at such high percentages exceeding anticipated values, it really means this isn't just like a guy that's got 20 of them back at home. These are real people buying cars with real money. That shows that not only is the enthusiasm there and the collectability there, but the war chest of money that is going into these cars as an asset class is clearly present in the retiring budgets of baby boomers and in the collections of younger people that may be deploying family capital, but they are certainly spending strong money on these cars. There was a gorgeous, exceptional example, yellow 512M, as rare as you could want a Ferrari of that vintage to be. Very, very cool. Great number, 912 grand. But, you know, to me, the biggest surprise was the 512 TR doing 775 grand. I mean, once again, probably twice what we would have thought the car would bring, but so many bidders, so much action on the car, and it's crazy to see these cars just jumping even as 80s cars. Now we know that 80s cars have gone up, but they've sort of staled in comparison to what we've seen out of the 90s and 2000s cars, just as those buyers seem to be entering the marketplace at a more rapid rate. Of course, the Ferrari hypercars continued to do strong money. F40s did crazy money. Two of them, one at Gooding, one at RM, did $3.8 million each, which again is, there was $2 million F40s just before this auction, and now there aren't anymore. And these cars were low mile, great examples, but they both needed a lot of work to properly wake them up and make them drivable, usable cars if they weren't just going to be parked in some collection to preserve their low mileage. The MC12 at Broad Arrow did 5.2, and a Koenigsegg CCXR did 3.2, both extraordinary numbers, but kind of within the bounds of what people would have expected, but great affirming values for the markets of each of those. The Porsche money throughout the weekend was crazy, which is I guess good to see. I have always personally struggled to grasp the magnitude of money that it takes to actually move and transact all of the versions of 911s that have somehow become collectible. But to watch 2018 GT2 RSs do $800,000 plus is something that's really hard for me to wrap my head around. I mean, it's a wonderful car, a great example to own. If you were only going to own one, that's a great 911 to pick, but that is crazy even for really great paint to sample cars. We saw all the auctions do well. Bonhams placed a ton of hypercars from Bugatti, Pagani, Koenigsegg, things like that, all at really, really good respectable numbers, which was a fear. Anytime you see this volume of significant and collectible cars coming to the market all at once, you have that anxiety of like, are there enough buyers in the room? Are there enough people ready to write such big checks? And the answer at Car Week was yes. So the takeaway really has to be that the market for collectible, modern, exotic cars has never been stronger, and anything from the 90s and 2000s in particular is about as hot as it could possibly be. Now, I will say, from a selfish perspective, the Lambos were not terribly well represented at Car Week. Several cars placed for strong and very appropriate money, but nothing massively outperformed it. Now, there weren't any good Mercies or anything like that for sale, but a couple of good Diablo SVs brought good money, but they didn't, massively outperform the way the Ferraris did. And so it's hard to know exactly what the crystal ball shows for the next 10, 20 years of the collectability and the values of these cars, but at the moment, they are certainly stratospherically trajected, and it is impressive to see the amount of capital being deployed in them as an asset class and the true enthusiasm, because the cars that are being bought are really wonderful cars to own, use, drive, and enjoy. And that's always my hope, is that these cars get out there on the roads, they get seen at more shows, more events, more rallies, and it is great to see these large groups of F50s, these large groups of hypercars, supercars around Car Week doing so many great things and representing so much enthusiasm for the cars. Once again, I want to thank Premier Financial Services for supporting this video and this month of VINwiki content. Check them out now at the link in the description below to talk to them about what you might be qualified for, and so that they can have the reaction times to make it possible for you to buy cars in a market that may be moving faster than any of us could possibly anticipate. And so lean on them for their expertise, for their advocacy, because they are on your side as the buyer, as you talk to dealers, as you talk to auction houses, whatever it is you're trying to do and whatever it is that you're trying to buy. Premier Financial Services is the perfect partner in that shopping and financing process.